Hey, what's up guys? My name is Ashtongleckman and welcome to this next video where we're going to be chatting a little bit about cue sheets, why we use them, and going from not using one to using one could help improve your overall workflow and getting into that ending product quickly and efficiently. So, a lot of the times our job as composers can be quite difficult because there's a lot of music that has to be written that hasn't been written, and you need to get it to the studio or the director in a very quick amount of time. In some composers throughout history, it's been sort of insane, like James Horner with the Alien score, and then James Newton Howard with the King Kong score, where he had to write like 3 hours of music in a month. So the whole idea of a cue sheet is to lay it out visually in front of you to know what has to be written, and then to see the empty spaces and to be able to make your decisions on what cue you need to write, so that you can get to that ending product quickly, and also deliver something that is also of high quality as well, because that's the whole goal. Our job is sort of like defeating the impossible, which is delivering something that the quality hasn't been sacrificed by the amount of time that we've spent on it. So that's the whole goal in general. So reasons to use cue sheets. So first thing is organization of time and keeping your eyes on the deadline. So you can see usually we have the length of the cue on the cue sheet, which will help us determine the amount of time that we should spend on each cue each sort of day. So you should have an overall idea of how long it'll take you to write one cue, or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 4 minutes of music. So for me, I knew that I'd be able to write one of these cues every single day, other than, for example, 4M23, which is almost a 7.5 minute cue. So I knew that I'd be able to write 2.5 minutes of music every single day. So each one of these was 1 day. And then when I got here, this was right around 2 days. So I knew that I could do that in 2 days. And so after doing all the math, I figured out that I could finish the score right on time. So it really presents to you a really good visual way of telling what needs to be written, and how long you really have to do it. And it really puts your whole job in a very simple way in front of you and gives you a really good schedule to follow. So another thing that's awesome about cue sheets is, since it's on like Google Drive and people can access it through multiple different parts of the world, the director, who's maybe in another state or across the country, can in real time update the cue sheet to say, hey, I need some changes, type in the revision notes, and then put for example, like a red on the approval, or if you're somebody who likes to use green as finish, put a yellow to put not completed yet, still some revisions that have to be fixed before the final dub. So that's another reason to use cue sheets, is the approval process, and we'll talk just a little bit about that in a couple minutes. So another reason is which composer actually is writing each specific cue. We call these people additional music composers, and some composers have more than the others. But on this film, I worked with a composer. I wouldn't call him an additional music composer, but I worked with him on this film, and he helped me on the last 2 reels. He's a great composer, Brendan Cochran, and you can see I put BC, his initials here, and then I am AG. So that's just a good way to organize that. So the first thing you'll see is the cue number. So the first number is the reel. Some films will be 4, 5, 6, even 7 reels, depending on how long the film is. If it's like a Titanic type film, it's going to be a lot of reels. And this, of course, all goes back to the days where they actually used to cut film, and they still do sometimes now, of course. But a lot of the times it's digital now, especially with the styles of directors like David Fincher, where everything is going very, very digital. But in general, films will be split into reels so that you can better organize yourself and organize each specific section of the film. And this film was 4 reels, and you could see that this film as well was 4 reels, and then this film was only 1 reel because it was only like 15 minutes long. So the first number is the reel, and then the second number is the cue number. So you can see it goes from 9 to 10. It actually continues between the multiple reels. So that's sort of how that is laid out. So title. So a lot of the times composers will name the actual cues before they even start writing anything. Some composers will just leave the cue number there, which is perfectly fine. They'll just say, I have 1M1, 1M2 to write, blah, 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 etc. But when you have the title, it allows for you to sort of better understand the emotion and vibe of whatever the specific cue is all about, so that it can be a lot more smooth in the process, and you'll know, oh, this cue has this feel, this cue has this feel, and it really allows for you to organize yourself just a little bit better. Each step here is just to organize yourself in a more sophisticated manner. So that's what we have going on with the titles. So here you can see we have the time code. So this, of course, represents when the cue starts and when it ends. So this is done in a process called the spotting session, which you might be familiar with. If not, it's when you, the director, the producer, or a music editor, if it's on a more high-budget film, will make the decision when music is going to come in and when it's going to come out. And in a film that's like 5 minutes long and you only have, it's wall-to-wall music, you don't really need time codes like this. But if you have a film where music is starting and then stopping, and then there's a little bit of dead zone in terms of the music, and then it starts and stops and starts and stops, and there's all these different cues, then it's really, really important to be able to have your time codes. So if you're running, for example, a Pro Tools video slaving machine, you can enter in the time code and it'll automatically go there in Pro Tools. Or if you're just importing the video directly into your digital audio workstation, you know exactly where to go, and everything's synced up, and you really know how to keep yourself organized in that specific way. So that's very important. Usually my approval color is actually sort of like this yellowish color. A lot of people's, it will be green. And this last project I did, I made it green, but you can see these two are yellow. So that's sort of how I present finished. And then green for me usually means that I've written it, and then red means there's something wrong, I need to go back, and then yellow is, all right, we're good for the final dub. So, and that could be different for you, and it could also be different depending on which music editor and which director you're working with and how they're usually used to doing cue sheets. So that's something that you should probably have a discussion with the team about before you even start. So these are revision notes. You can see there's not a lot here. There's none here. There's like one here because once I finish a revision, I completely delete it. So these are obviously just sort of leftovers. You can see like this one is Pigman part still fucked offbeat. That's a good example of revision notes. It's almost funny because a lot of the times with revision notes, if you're the one giving yourself revision notes, you really want to be like really hard on yourself so that it can sort of remind you exactly where that point is that you were thinking or talking about. So like for example here, I was like still fucked offbeat. It really gives you a good idea what's going wrong. Excuse me. So yeah, then you can see here I have add a bit of violin during Buchenwald's section, just like 10 seconds of improv. And then that revision notes would go via Google Drive to the violinist, who would then, improvise for 10 seconds over this cue, which ended up happening. So yeah, so that's what we have going on there. And then I don't have it on this cue sheet or this cue sheet. Well, I do here, but I never filled it out. But I also have a soundtrack section. This will determine what's going to be on the final soundtrack and what isn't. And yellow pretty much means I don't know if it's going to be on the soundtrack yet. It probably could. I'm not sure yet. This track ended up being on the soundtrack, for example. This didn't. And the reds ended up never being on the soundtrack. So these are unreleased cues here. So yeah, green pretty much means I'm happy with the cue. I think it's listenable away from the film, and it's a good way to really make that decision as you're writing the score. I actually fill it in as I'm writing it. Like once I've written a cue and I'm like, yeah, I feel like that could be something that you could listen to. It's not just underscore. It also has a little bit of musical vibes that could possibly be listened to away from the film. That's why I put it in there, and it's a good way to organize yourself as you're writing the score so that you don't need to go back and listen to the whole score multiple times again. For me, that's really helpful. You don't want to deliver your stuff like right before the deadline, like a few days before. You want to give them enough time to do what it is that they need to do in terms of the dub. And on lower budget films, usually they aren't going to be on a dubbing stage. Usually when I say dub, I mean in a studio where they have Premiere open and they're balancing all the levels, making sure that everything sounds good and stuff like that. That's sort of like the more low budget dubbing process. So sometimes also in the lower section, you'll have the reels actually laid out in front of you so you know when the reel starts and when it ends. So you can see here we have right around 20-minute reels, and that gives you an overall good idea also because once you finish once I finish one reel, I'll send that to the director. And then if they give a go on it, I'll move on to reel 2, etc. I don't send cue by cue by cue because then it can just sort of hold you back a little bit and it could get a little bit confusing. Also, if we have a solo instrumentalist recording on a cue, usually I'll put that in the cue number section here. Like, I didn't have any instrumentalists here. I did have an instrumentalist here, but we did guitars for most every single cue, actually, so I didn't really need to put that there. So that's really what we have going on in general in terms of the cue sheet. And you can see here, actually, okay, yeah, so that's just what I was talking about in terms of the soundtrack. So another thing, for TV cue sheets, you'll have a few different other things. For example, you'll have the air date of the episode. You'll have the episode number / title, so like 502, 503, 504, etc. You wouldn't have that on a film, of course. Also, an additional cue sheet that you might have on a film is the source music cue sheet, or the sample music cue sheet. For example, on a film that takes place in the 80s, we're going to have a lot of music from bands like Van Halen and stuff like that. Then you're going to need to have a sheet where you can lay out all the different songs that you're going to use and when those are going to be. Hope you guys all enjoyed, and I will see you guys later. See ya.